Thank you for joining us. My name is John, and I have the great pleasure of being here with Congressman Tom McClintock, and he's taken some time away from Washington to actually visit us in his district, and it's been kind of a nice thing, and we'll have some topics we're working on. And this half hour, we're going to try to keep it on topic here a little bit, but this is one that's been impacting a lot of people's lives, is immigration. And you know, we've all seen the news coverage. We've seen your visits down there to the border a couple months ago. You know, tell us, what do you think the state of stuff is right now? Where are we at? I mean, how is it?
We're way beyond any question of whether this is a border crisis. The question now is whether we have a border at all. And I can tell you from firsthand observation, the answer is no, we don't. You know, I've watched, in one evening in McAllen, I've watched several hundred illegal migrants cross our international border illegally. Line up in Disneyland-style queues right at the border, get their basic information taken down, and then waved to transportation hubs to take them anywhere in the country they want at taxpayer expense. On my flight out of McAllen, I counted about 40 illegals on that single flight in 12 different groups. And it's not that, you know, they're bound for Texas. This was a flight to the hub in Denver. And from there you could see, because they carry these envelopes with them, their destination is written on it, Baltimore, Chicago. One of the Border Patrol agents warned me, you need to let your folks know that they don't stay here. Every community in America is now a border community. And with the numbers that we're seeing, you know, 180,000 illegal crossings just last month. We've already had 1 million for the year. This is up like 700 or 800% over last year. We actually had, under President Trump, we had achieved operational control of the border. We were deporting those that the courts had ordered to be deported. They'd already had, you know, they had their hearings, they had their day in court, they were ordered deported. Of course, they then don't deport. We have to go get them. We were doing that. We had the Remain in Mexico policy, which meant if you were making an asylum claim, before that claim was adjudicated, you had to stay in Mexico. And we were building the border wall, which is nearly completed. That brought the flow of illegal immigration to a trickle. I mean, and the numbers speak for themselves. You look at family units crossing the border. The week of the election in 2020, barely 100 family units illegally crossed the border. By the day of the inauguration, it was 1,100 a week. And now it's about 14 to 15,000 a week.
A question, what is, you know, because you have the official numbers, which people, you know, that they catch and stuff like that. From talking to the Border Patrol agents, what's the real number? What's the I mean, what's the real, I mean, is it double, is it triple? I mean, what percentage are they catching?
They don't know for sure. The got-away figures, which I believe are about, I'm tempted to say about 300,000 so far this year. Those are people they've observed on cameras that they couldn't get to.
Got it.
They actually will sweep these dirt roads by the fence and look at tracks. But if they can't document it on either through footprints or through video, they don't count it. So they really don't know. So the numbers of gotaways, which are, you know, several 100,000 so far for this year, that's just the tip of the iceberg. How big is the iceberg? Nobody really knows. But what is most of the illegal crossings are simply turning themselves in, because under this administration, they're simply allowed into the country. Some of them aren't even given court dates. Some of them are just given a phone number to call once they get to their destination, which they rarely do. And the impact that is now having on this country, People are going to be seeing it in their own communities. Your kids are going to be coming home, and when you ask them, what'd you do in school today, they're going to say, well, not much. We were just told to read. We've got 10 non-English speakers in the class, and the teacher had to spend all their time with them. Or you take your kid into the emergency room with a broken arm, you're going to find it packed with illegals demanding basic care. Mm-hmm. You're going to see it in the crime rates. One terrible thing this administration has done is to take California's sanctuary policy and basically make it national. What that means is a criminal illegal who, in addition to crossing the border illegally, has then gone on to commit other crimes against Americans.
Right.
They get caught, they get prosecuted, they get sent to jail. When they're about to be released, they're supposed to be picked up by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and deported the hell out of this country.
Right.
What California started to do was to say, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to release these criminal felons when they're ready to be released. Instead of deporting them, we're going to release them right back into our neighborhoods. Now Biden has picked that up, and they're doing that across the country. So you're going to see it in increased crime rates. You're going to see it in increased gang activity. We can talk about that in a second, because I just had a Q&A with Christopher Wray, the FBI director, on that, and he confirmed this. But the other thing you're going to see it is in depressed wages for working families, as the labor market is absolutely flooded with low-wage illegal labor. And this mass migration that we're seeing now at the border, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The Gallup polling organization says that based on their polling, they estimate that there are 42 million people living in Latin America and the Caribbean alone who intend to come to this country now that they have a chance to do so. And if that is anywhere close to accurate, this is a mass migration literally of historic proportions that no civilization has ever survived. I think history is screaming this warning at us that countries that either cannot or will not enforce their borders simply aren't around very long. And when you look at the human tragedy of the migrants themselves, that's another issue. One of the border agents told me of a conversation he'd had with the mother who just brought her 5-year-old son on this 1,500-mile trail of terror from Honduras. And he says, why are you bringing why did you expose your child to this kind of danger? And she says, well, to escape the gangs and get him a better education. And the agent says to him, you understand, those gangs are already here. And your son's going to go to a school where he doesn't speak the language, doesn't understand the culture. And the first place he's going to turn for protection and acceptance is the gangs. But the conversation I had with Chris Wray at a hearing last month, I think also is a huge warning. These migrants come across the border heavily indebted to the cartels. Yes. The cartels have operational control of the border. You do not cross that border without paying them. And the tab can be in it's $4,000 for the basic crossing. Many of these migrants arrive indebted to the cartels for $10,000 or $15,000, which is astronomical for them. Well, how are those debts enforced once they get here? They're enforced by the gangs that do the business of the cartels. And you're seeing the gang activity proliferate across the country. Absolutely dangerous gangs like MS-13 are accompanying these migrants into the country because they're the ones that are enforcing those debts. And there's actually now many of them find themselves in indentured servitude, which is just another way of saying slavery, which I find is particularly bizarre. The left is so concerned about slavery that ended 150 years ago, but couldn't care less about the slavery that's going on in our own country right now because of the policies that they've adopted.
Put some numbers on it. So let's say if the cartels own the border, and all the crossings, let's say the average, they owe the cartel $7,500 or $8,000. How many people do we have in the U.S. now that basically are indentured servants and are actually agents of the cartels?
We don't know.
They will do their bidding.
What I learned on one of my border visits in Yuma.
Yeah.
A lot of these are unaccompanied children, and the reason for that is under the Biden, they're automatically brought into the country.
Right.
Under Trump, they were sent back home. We make now no effort to send them back to their homes. All we do is process them into the country to sponsors who are sometimes a distant family member, sometimes a family friend. We really don't know, or just a name on a sheet. Now, what they tell me is, well, we do an investigation to be sure that they live where they say they live and everything. I said, well, when you place a child with this sponsor, what do you do to follow up? And the answer is, unless requested, we don't follow up.
Right.
So we have absolutely no idea how what's happening to those kids once they're brought into this country, heavily indentured to the cartels. But I don't think it's much of a wild guess to say, I think a lot of them will end up with a gang member knocking on the door saying, this kid owes us $15,000. We'll just take him to run some errands for us until he's paid that off when he's 25.
So they have their foot soldiers. So they have all their foot soldiers up here. They already have them.
And I asked that of the FBI director, and he confirmed it. So we're going to be seeing a lot of this. I think it's not going to be too long before we start seeing rivalry among the gangs over turf that has just torn the heart out of Mexico. Those same forces have now been unleashed in our country, and I think it's just a matter of time before we see the same pathologies occur here. And the thing is, it's so preventable because we had that control. To look at that border wall, for example, I mean, it's 30 feet high. The problem is it has a few, and it goes on from San Diego all the way to McAllen, but there are construction gaps left in it. Some of them are simply gates that don't operate because the motors to operate them, although they'd arrived by January 20th, had not been installed by January 20th. The material, at each of these gaps that I saw, the material to fill the gaps is already bought and paid for, sitting in construction yards nearby. I mean, literally right on the border, waiting to be lifted into place.
Which will be stolen now.
But on January, that's another problem. On January 20th, Joe Biden issued an executive order. Actually, issued a series of them. One of them was halt all construction on the border. They can't even install the electric motors to move the gates so they can close the gates. So what happens? Those become the crossing points, and it basically renders the wall useless. And it's not just from Central America. We're seeing these illegals crossing from all over the world.
Right.
When I was in Yuma, we saw the first group we saw was two family units. They were from Romania. Or maybe this is it may have been El Paso. We saw another large group, about 20 to 25 family units from 3 different countries: Russia, Armenia, and Cuba. They tell me there are a lot coming up from Brazil now.
Dumb question. Why, if it's going to... Why don't these people, instead of doing the trek across and everything else, why don't they just get a plane ticket and fly in and overstay a visa? Why do that? Why go across the border that way? Why? There has to be a reason.
Well, I don't know the reason, other than I suspect it's just cheap. What they're doing, a lot of them are have means.
Right.
So these groups from Europe. They had on clean clothes, fresh haircuts, luggage.
Sure.
What they do is they fly into Mexico on a tourist visa, which are much easier to get in Mexico than the United States.
Okay.
And I suspect that may be the primary reason. It's just a lot easier and a lot cheaper. They then go into the interior and get on a bus to go to these gaps in the wall, go across, and then make an asylum claim. Which makes a mockery of our entire asylum process. Asylum is there for those people who, because they are members of a specific class, are subject to persecution by their government. That's the definition of asylum.
Got it.
But here's the thing. The moment that you cross the international boundary, you have now separated yourself from the government that is oppressing the group that you belong to. That does not give you a right to pass through 5 other countries on your way to the United States to claim asylum here.
Right.
Once you've crossed that border, you've achieved asylum. you should be applying in that country, not in ours. And again, that's why so many of these asylum claims, ultimately, when they go to trial, when they're heard by a judge,
they fail.
They fail.
Yeah.
But by that time, the individual, for example, the group that I saw being processed directly into the country, given a number to call, they're supposed to call that number when they get there. Then they'll be assigned, if they call, they'll be assigned a court hearing, a court date. That court date will probably be 3 or 4 years from now. During that time, they have a legal right to work in the country, so they'll be depressing American wages. If they show up for the court hearing and they are denied asylum, what is routine is the judge will say, well, you've been here for 3 years, we'll give you 30 days to take care of your personal affairs, and then you have to present yourself to ICE to be deported. They say fine, they go away, and guess what?
They don't.
They don't.
Right.
And that is the impact that's going to have on communities is just enormous, particularly flooding the labor market with this low wage labor.
Yeah. Question, I guess then is, I know that in the House you guys are still a few seats short of being able to be, having any real power again. What's the plan now? What's the immigration plan for the next, is there really nothing that can be structurally done until after the next election cycle, or what's the plan on some of the border stuff now?
Well, first of all, we know how to fix the border because we had fixed the border.
Right.
Complete the border wall.
Right.
Resume court-ordered deportations. Stop releasing dangerous felons into our communities and allow ICE to do its job. One of the executive orders that Biden signed the first day was essentially to tell the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, stop enforcing the law.
Right.
Now this from a president that the Constitution commands to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. That's the oath he swears, to well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office.
Yeah.
All of that, not only ignored, but countermanded by this executive order. And you can see the ICE deportations have fallen to the lowest level in recorded history.
If you're an ICE agent now, it'd be hard to go to work in the morning.
Oh, it's very demoralizing. I've talked to an awful lot of these border agents, and they are very demoralized.
Yeah.
And they see the human plight of these folks who've been encouraged by the administration to make this trek. Which is very dangerous, and they are preyed upon along the way.
A question: has the GOP done any polling? How is this issue playing right now? The Democrats, from the news perspective, they want to. Is this issue a losing issue for them now? Have they lost this issue again? How is it polling?
I think the American people are beginning to awaken to the danger that this poses, not only to the sovereignty of our country, but to the quality of their own individual lives.
Right.
And again, we've talked about that, the impact on the education system, the impact on the welfare system, the impact on our hospitals, the impact on our criminal justice system, the dangers that are multiplying now for Americans because of this huge influx of individuals who are completely unvetted. And we know, in fact, just this past weekend, we saw, I think, 5 individuals intercepted by the Border Patrol that had previous convictions for rape and other, and for that matter, homicide.
Politically, do they run the risk of having this issue be much for them like crime was in New York? If you look at the Democrat that won the mayor's,
Adams,
he was very, he's probably very liberal on a lot of issues, but at least on law and order, he's an ex-cop, do you think they run the risk of having this issue become for them, or an opportunity for the GOP, not a risk for the, Democrat, that this issue becomes much like that?
I think the American
you can
people,
hang it around their neck?
I think the American people are realizing the risk to their country and to their own quality of life by these policies. And you know, we haven't even talked about the whole defund the police movement and this enormous. You know, they're kind of interrelated.
Well, this has been defund the border, right? Isn't this been defund the border?
Yeah, defund the border police is essentially what they're doing. There's no difference between defunding them and telling them they can't do their jobs.
Yeah.
But the crime rate is in part being driven by this influx of gang activity. But of course, most of it is a very simple fact, and that is, if you don't prosecute crime, you get more crimes. If you have fewer police out there, you get more crimes.
Yeah.
It's not very complicated. You know, we tried this to a limited extent in the 1970s, and we saw the crime rates just absolutely skyrocket.
Yep.
And that's what we're seeing again today. So it's not a question of you know, political advantage. It's a question of the American people.
Right.
Saying,
no, I get that. Yes.
These policies are posing a direct threat to our families, our quality of life, and our country. And yes, I think people are slowly beginning to awaken to this.
I guess a little bit on this is I will try to stay on the immigration topic, but a little bit back on Washington. Do you think professional Washington, since they never are really impacted personally by the decisions that they push forward, the decisions they made, they still make their, you know, 6 figures and go home to a Washington, D.C. suburb. Do you think there's a disconnect to where they view all of this as purely political, abstracted from the reality of it at all? I mean, is it just purely...
It doesn't affect them, so they don't care.
Okay.
The people who care are the people whose wages are being driven down by this low-wage labor. That's not the Washington elites.
No.
Those are folks you know, that are in entry-level positions, that are just getting started, that are, you know, trying to get skills and job experience. It's working class Americans who feel that the most heavily.
DC suburbs could benefit because they get their services done cheaper, right? Yeah. Isn't that puts a downward pressure on?
No, it's working American
services.
families that feel the pressure from the job market, from the overwhelming of our emergency services, the crime rate. You know, they're disproportionately affected by crime. And all of the other social and political and economic pathologies that go with this. I mean, if you take a look, you know, more broadly, every place where the left has seized control, you see exactly the same pathologies. You see skyrocketing crime rates. You see failing schools, sky-high taxes, chronic shortages of basic services like electricity, water, you name it. Businesses, heavy regulation, businesses fleeing, and ultimately the population voting with their feet and moving. I mean, you look at California as a prime textbook of that.
Yes.
We've had a net domestic outmigration, that is more people moving out of California than moving in for the last 3 decades. And I've often pointed out, the census data tells us a lot of them are moving to Nevada and Arizona. Now you look at this beautiful state with everything we have.
Amazing.
Equitable climate, bountiful resources here. I mean, we're on the Pacific Rim in a position to dominate world trade, and people are finding a better place to live and work and raise their families in the middle of the Nevada nuclear test range.
Right.
Now, I can't conceive of any act of God that could do that much damage to a beautiful state like California. But acts of government have done that much damage, and people are telling us that because they are fleeing this beautiful state for the wastelands of Nevada, Arizona, Utah, Texas. That speaks volumes. But you see these pathologies exclusively where the left has taken control. And I think there's a big debate right now in the Democratic Party between these leftists that have seized control of that party and your traditional liberals. I've spent my life debating traditional liberals over the proper scope and size and cost of government. But we all agreed on basics. We all fervently supported free speech. We all fervently believed that people should be judged as individuals on the content of their character and not the color of their skin. You know, we all believed in the founding principles of our country. We're all proud of our country. The left shares none of those values, and I actually think that liberals now have more in common with conservatives than they have with the left.
The old traditional liberals.
Yeah.
The traditionals,
and
yes.
that's something that I think is now being sorted out in the Democratic Party, and your point's well taken. The victory of Eric Adams in New York is telling us there are an awful lot of Democrats who are beginning to recognize the enormous danger of these leftist policies.
Because it's not just pro-union, the traditional Democratic platform, planks. It's not the, it's.
No, this is leftist authoritarianism.
Yes.
In its naked form, and people are starting to see that, and it frightens me. I think it's frightening a lot of people.
And
it has implications for everything from the economy to our civil liberties.
We've got about 5 minutes left on this topic of immigration. Then is, if you were going to sum up what should be the GOP's platform going forward right now? We're not in the Trump era anymore. The border is broken again. What's an actual plan for the next couple years from a GOP that's has some possibility of actually some impacts?
Right.
What is it?
First and foremost, restore MPP that Trump had initiated and Biden repealed. That means if you're applying for asylum, you don't get automatic entry into the country. You have to wait until it's adjudicated. And then I would go forward with some fundamental legislative reforms, such as denying asylum status to anyone who has crossed into another country, as we discussed earlier.
Right.
Allowing ICE simply to enforce court-ordered deportations. I mean, if we're not going to deport people that courts have ordered be deported, then our immigration laws mean absolutely nothing. And if our immigration laws don't mean anything, it means our borders don't mean anything.
Right.
And we're no longer a country at that point. We're just a vast international territory between Canada and Mexico, both of which, by the way, have immigration laws, very strict immigration laws, that they actually enforce. And there's no, you talk to any border agent, there is no substitute for completing the border wall. It works.
Right.
But it only works if it's complete and you don't have these these hundreds of gaps across it that people simply walk right through.
Do you think some of the moderate Democrats or some of the Democrats that are on border districts and stuff, are they feeling enough of the heat that they will have to allow that the Biden administration will have to revert back to many of the policies that were in effect before? You don't think they've?
There are a couple in the border. Henry Cuellar, for example, spoken out on this, but I think he's the exception rather than the rule. This is not incompetence.
Right. It's deliberate.
It is absolutely deliberate. It is a calculated effort to fundamentally change the culture, the electorate, and the founding principles of this country. And it's working. But there is a very, very strong reaction. I ran into the woman who's now the Republican county chairman in Hudspeth County. That's right next door to El Paso, on the border. She moved there in 2016. Every local official was a Democrat. She tried to get involved in the Republican Party in Hudspeth County, Texas, and discovered there was none. She actually had to go to the state Republican Party and get them to appoint her as the Republican county chairman so she could go and start a Republican organization there. That was in 2016. She tells me that today every local elected official is a Republican, and Republican registration in Hudspeth County is 68%.
Wow.
We just saw that in McAllen with the election of a Republican. In fact, I think it was McAllen's first Republican mayor.
Yeah.
People are beginning to recognize this. With the enormous economic expansion that we had under Trump, the people who benefited the most were working Americans. We had the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years.
Yeah.
But we had the lowest unemployment rate for blacks and Hispanics.
I think we're just about.
Well, at any rate,
yeah.
People understand this affects their lives,
Yeah.
and that's going to have a profound effect, I think, in the future trajectory of our country.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you,
Thank
John.
you.